according to USA Today, there are 8 strains of coronavirus that are circling the world. So what does that mean? Like, is this normal for a relatively new virus to have 8 strains? And how does the presence of 8 strains impact the development of a vaccine?
Great question. Yeah, so I mean, like anything that's viral mutates pretty fast. RNA viruses are particularly known to mutate really, really fast. So anything that's out there as a virus in the viral world, there's multiple strains out there. That's a given, right? If it exists, it exists in multiple forms. You can almost guarantee that, right? In terms of what that means in terms of response, generally the same thing it would mean for like a seasonal flu vaccine, really. Not to oversimplify it, but basically when you get a flu vaccine, it's not like one strain that's in there, right? They do a mathematical modeling approach that's like really like a crapshoot, really. And you end up getting a vaccine that's like 4 or 5 strains that have been attenuated, right? So attenuated basically means that they're they're their whole virus, but they're not active, right? So they can't infect you. So this whole thing about, oh, you get the flu from the flu vaccine is not possible. It's attenuated strains are not alive. But basically, it's not just one strain. It's like 4 or 5. And they usually try to predict which flu strains to put in the seasonal flu vaccine based on what's going on the season before in a different hemisphere, right? So what's floating around the world before our flu season gets here, and then what are the historical and underlying strains that have been circulating in our population continuously, right? And so they kind of pick and choose which things are going to put in any seasonal flu vaccine, right? And so if you kind of transpose that into what we have right now with COVID-19, it would suggest something similar. It mutates fast enough where you can't just have a monovalent vaccine, right? So you're going to have multiple versions of the COVID and in the vaccine, right? Whether or not there's going to be, different versions to suit the U.S. population, because we're in a global context, right? And people travel. So that for me, it would suggest that if you're going to develop a vaccine for this, you're going to have a multivalent vaccine that incorporates elements from the different strains that are most populous or most prominent throughout the rest of the world, right? So you might have something in there that can help protect against the strain that's in East Asia, protect against a strain that's kind of developing and evolving and mutating in South America, right? So it makes it very complicated and complex, right? And so folks are like, oh, we're going to vaccine quick. Like it takes like 12 to 18 months to develop a vaccine, right? Because you have to figure out what works, figure out how to grow it and scale it up, produce it. And you have to make sure it actually works, right? And so you have to have clinical trials. And generally the rule of thumb is that as long as you need the protection in your population, so if you need to last the entire season for like a flu, if you need to last 6 months, that's how long you have to follow people in the study to make sure that it actually works for 6 months. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that in terms of developing a potential vaccine for this, it's definitely going to take a lot of smart folks, way smarter than I am, to figure out what to put in it, test it out, and get it out to the population. And I think this brings it back to the point I made earlier, way back in the conversation about Indonesia, back with H1N1, right? And the idea of securitization. If we're going to develop this vaccine and it's going to be effective in the global world, it's going to rely on samples taken from all around the world, samples from countries that might not be able to afford what the United States pharmaceutical companies want to charge for it, right? So what does that mean in terms of equity and social justice going forward, right? Who's going to be able to get access to this vaccine when we develop it, right? Because we can't develop an effective one without everybody sharing their specimens. So that's where we're going to be at. We need to make sure we're sharing the benefits of whatever vaccine gets developed, right? Otherwise, who are we? You know what I mean? Like, what does that mean about us as people, as human beings, if we're not willing to do that, right?